You're a very good home cook, yeah?
I do like to cook. We had great braised short rib actually at Pompette last night.
Man, I'm kind of guilty. I haven't been there a whole lot since it's opened.
It's great. I mean, I think we were talking about it yesterday that it is a privilege that there's a place like that just down the street from us. You know, living in a place like Chicago, you know, I think people can become jaded pretty quickly.
That is, that is so true. I agree, but tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, you know, that restaurant, if it were in my hometown where I grew up, would be like, you know, star-studded. People would be lining up out the door to get into Pompette. And, you know, I think Pompette, I sure hope Pompette is doing well. And they've certainly gotten a lot of good press, well-deserved. But I mean, it must be, it's a lot of competition. You know, I feel like places that are, you know, really well, like, that get a lot of press in the first few months, and then people forget about them because there's always something new. Just like there's so much IQ for restaurants and wine in Chicago, and so just the fact that we can just like walk out our door, bring our 5-year-old in, and have a great time.
Yeah,
really lucky. So.
For sure. Do you think that's a uniquely Chicago thing, this sort of amnesia that we have for great restaurants, or do you think that's a big city thing?
No, I mean, social media, TikTok, YouTube, the internet. Who's, you know, unless you ask people what book they're reading and they're just like, what book? I don't know. It's an intentional thing. And so I think that's, I just applaud people who are willing to put the time and effort into it, and the dollars, like it can't be easy.
No, I agree. And I know I was just talking to someone about this too, where it's like the reading thing is funny. Like I asked them if they're going to make a cookbook, and he goes, well, I don't read. So, and he was joking, but he also kind of wasn't. He was like, the last book I probably read was in high school. And it's like, well, you used to be a professor, right? So like academia has a little special place in your heart too.
Well, I hope that reading is not just you know, a privilege of the university, but I think
yes, of course.
Frankly, I mean, my attention span is lower. I think it's not a moral judgment. It's just it's a description of the world. But I think that it's always a good reminder to step back and just pay attention and to realize how impressive people are in the work that they do. So, yeah, you know, shout out to the Bucktown crew, great restaurants in the neighborhood. And,
For sure.
It's really nice.
Well, highlighting great work people do is now what you do full time as a wine importer, I would say.
Yeah, that's right. I try to say like we're the least important people in the process. I mean that as sort of facetiously, but we don't make the wine. We don't bottle it. We don't ship it.
Right.
We warehouse it, and we try to communicate what's relevant about it. So I think I take that seriously, which is to say I try to keep as little ego in the process as possible, but it's really important at the same time. So
yeah. When you have experience with this, obviously not just wine, but very specifically the food, the automatic feeder's going. You know, it's like if you couldn't tell, this was already filmed in my apartment, in my condo. Now it's like very much solidified. So yeah, I mean, you've had certainly wine experience, distribution side, but more so also importer side too. So you worked for Rosenthal, this legendary wine importer, up there with the other big dogs, I would say, in the US, Kermit Lynch being up there as well. I'd have to assume that how much of you working at Rosenthal informed your decision-making for starting your own company?
A lot of it. I mean, I would say, so just to step back, I think the whole process of wine sales in the US is rather opaque. I know you've highlighted a lot of this before and know the ins and outs of it, but you know, there are, you know, you as an importer, you can't just knock on my door and say, I'd like to buy some wine as like a random human. Right. There are tiers to this process. And so, but you know, there are restaurants and retailers, there are distributors, and there are importers. And so my job as an importer is to find producers, represent them, to sell them to distributors who then pass those wines on to restaurants and retailers. And so, you know, the first thing that I realized when I realized that there's a difference between a distributor and an importer, because I worked for a distributor and then I worked for an importer, is that, you know, distributors have to in some way be everything to everyone. Their job is to solve problems for restaurants and retailers. And so, as a distributor, your job ideally is if somebody says, hey, I really like this wine from you, or I really like this tequila. Do you have a vodka? As a distributor, you want to be in a position to say yes, right? And so that creates this breadth of offerings and options to make ultimately the life of the retailer or restaurant buyer a little bit easier. Importers are, I think, almost exactly the opposite. Importers' job is to be very true to their own voice and to stand out and be specific in a market that is itself already crowded. And so, as I'm sure, as you say to the people who, listen to your YouTube channel and your interviews, like flip around the bottle and see who the importer is. If you don't have an idea of the voice of that importer, then you're in a lot of trouble. And so my job is to communicate not just what's important about the wines, but to try to put the wines that we represent at Lokai into a context that people can understand through the iconography of Lokai on the back of a label, or just when somebody says Lokai. So,
right.
Yeah.
You've explained the difference so well in a way that I haven't between a distributor and an importer. I think if you Googled the definition, you would get it and you're like, are these the same job almost?
Yeah.
But I think you described that incredibly well. And almost, do you feel like you're a critic in some capacity? Almost of like, you need to have some sort of discernment of why you pick something. And so it's things Randall Bush likes,
Yeah,
but also.
But there's a reason I didn't call it Randall Bush Selections either. I mean, I think ultimately one thing I love about this work, and you mentioned like I have an academic background, I was a professor, I studied the humanities, the philosophical traditions, like I'm interested in the ephemeral and the ethereal and the contingent. And so, if you ask me to explain to you why I like, this wine, Timarasso from La Colombera, I'm not going to say because it tastes like white flowers and it tastes like peaches. I'm going to say that it's because of the place that it comes from, the people who make it. And, that lands or it doesn't. But ultimately, it's that background work that doesn't add up to necessarily like a point score or a tasting note or any of the like shorthands that we use. It's that other work that goes into what Lokai is as a company that hopefully I think people find some meaning in.
Yeah.
So
what's sort of your philosophy at Lokai for how you pick your wine?
So Lokai means places in Latin. It's short for a longer phrase in the classical rhetorical tradition called Lokai communis, which means common places. Basically, the idea there is there's a whole history of thinking that's opposed to the philosophical tradition that says like, you learn by doing things with others. You learn by experiencing things together at a table, in a place, in a context. And that's actually how knowledge is gained. It's not just by rote or ideas, repetition, pure knowledge. And so, I thought Lokai would be a nice encapsulation of that idea. How I do what I do, it's some combination of a lot of research, a lot of communication, and I feel like you can meet somebody and know pretty quickly if you're going to be on the same page. I try to communicate my background. We talked about, I used to work for Neil Rosenthal, and the as you say, that portfolio, it's a iconic one, and the wines are really important. And to get back to your previous question, like what I learned being there was how to be attentive to the details, how to be able to taste a wine and look forward into the future, to be able to understand it, but also to be able to ask the right questions about it. But for Lokai, it's I tasted a lot of wines that I really liked, and then I met the people, and I was like, no, thank you, I'm okay.
Really?
Yeah. And that's not, that's just because this is a small company, and the work I want to do is engaging with those people in their work, trying to understand it and communicate it. And so we have to live together. So, people who, maybe thought I was too new, or maybe didn't think I had enough wide reach over the United States, like, that's fine. But it really is those like moments of judgment, like looking at people and being able to look them in the eye and have a conversation.
Right.
So, yeah.
How long have you been doing Lokai then?
I founded Lokai in May of 2023.
Okay.
Wine arrived, and I'm sure we'll talk about this. Wine arrived for me to sell in the United States at the end of October of 2023. So we are coming up on a year of being able to sell wine.
Sounds like a long time.
It feels, it's both a blur, and it's also a really, the days are long, but the months are short.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I can't think of a lot of businesses in which you sell a good where you have to wait so many months to even just begin selling it. And you would think one of the obvious barriers would be, well, it's alcohol. There's, if I was just a layman, there's probably some process about licensure and things you need to get for, procuring and selling alcohol. But it also seems like there's other things that are slowing down these processes.
Yeah, the first thing is that, the United States is a patchwork. Every state operates differently, and you have to engage with them as an importer differently. So you have to be licensed in every state. You have to fill out different compliance forms in every state. And so just the administrative element of it is not the easiest. It's the thing I'm the worst at, but it's also the most important. So I have help.
I was going to say, did you hire a legal lawyer, retainer?
No, I have some people who are very good with compliance who I work with on a 1099 fashion. It's not hard. I actually compile all the information, but I'm just frankly afraid of clicking that button. And so I will be like, please do this.
Yeah.
And people are happy to do it, and they're very, very generous.
Yeah.
But there are some things that as a small business owner, you're not that good at.
Yeah.
And so you have to find help to do that.
Totally.
But beyond the administrative licensure elements, the shipping situation can be complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an opaque industry, to put it kindly, I would say. At the best of times, it's opaque. And, when there's extra difficulty, it can be really, really difficult, especially for small companies, just planning around that sort of thing.
Right.
So, yeah.
I think we should drink some of your wine.
Sure. Okay, great.
Before we get, into shipping conversations, because I think we all know it's exhausting. And particularly as of recently it was a very short strike. It was 3 days, right? The longshoreman strike?
3 days, but the Port of New Jersey, which is the busiest port on the East Coast, elected to stay closed on Friday. So effectively 4 days.
Got it. And challenging, yes, considering that most of the wines that you are importing are coming from Europe. So this particular port would be the only way you would receive wine?
It's the port. Somebody asked me if I could send it to California. And I was like, you mean go through the Panama Canal? I said, well, yes, but they'd have to pull it off essentially the shipping grid, reroute it, and then charge you 4x what you paid to bring it in.
Yeah, so I don't think anyone would ever call it simple, but it's not even as simple as some people might think it would be.
No.
You can shut it off.
That's right.
Get in there. Get it.
Team Rosso, Italian white wine. If you're not drinking it, you should be.
Is it?
I haven't been in the restaurant wine business for my whole life. And so I got into wine through things that were a little bit roundabout, a little bit oblique. Sure, you can spend $30 on a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand or California or France, $50 for a bottle of Sancerre. But also, if you do a little bit more work, you can save yourself a lot of money and have a whole heck of a lot more fun buying wine. So Italian white wine, I think, is the category that defines that ethos to me, is that, if you want something that's crisp and bright, drink coastal whites from the Adriatic. If you want something that's textured and rich, Friuli. If you want something that's, has complex fruit, but also like a sort of chiseled character to it, may I recommend Team Rosso from Piedmont. And if I think there's so much possibility there, and, everybody wants to get a deal, but sometimes I think the best way to do that is to put in a little bit of time and effort, right? And so, here Team Rosso is just one of my favorite grapes. This is actually one of the first producers I went to go find when I started Lokai.
Really?
Table Donkey Stick, shout out on Armitage, hosted a Team Rosso dinner where there were 30 bottles of Team Rosso.
Wow.
And the single vineyard Il Montino from Elisa Semino at La Colombera, 2013 was far and away the best wine that we had. And
Wow.
so when I started Lokai, I shot her a note, the glories of digital communication. So,
Is that all it takes, though? Is that like...
no, it's not all it takes.
Well, like to get the ball rolling. It's like,
Sometimes.
hi, I tasted your wine at this restaurant. I loved it. I'm an importer. Can we talk about, is that all it takes?
Well, I mean, I think you have to you have to introduce yourself in the right way and ask questions that show that you care about what they're doing. You know, this producer has been with other importers, national importers, for instance, and frankly gotten lost in the shuffle. And so having the opportunity to try to articulate where you think a producer and a set of wines like this fit to them and not just to the market, I think is actually, people appreciate that because it shows that you're stopping to think about where things fit together. You know, anybody can put a portfolio together. It's not,
That's
you
true.
can just buy wine. There's a lot of wine out there, right?
Sure.
And so really it's about trying to have it fit.
Yeah.
But
There is a lot of wine. There's so much product. I mean, and I think it's interesting, and maybe it's bold to say that like all of your white wine needs could be fit within one country.
yeah, and I mean, I'll just make one exception, which is Burgundy.
Yeah, sure.
White Burgundy cannot be done in Italy as much as people have tried, and they shouldn't try.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a lot warmer generally. I think the soils don't fit, and also when I say Italian white wine, I mean that as shorthand for Italian native grapes, right? So Team Rosso doesn't really grow anywhere else. There are a couple places in California, for instance, that are now growing Team Rosso, but fundamentally, the home of a grape like this, a quite difficult grape like this, is Piedmont. You know, a strange part of Piedmont, but Piedmont. And so being able to like drill in on those little details, I think is exciting. You know, all the intricacies of Italy in particular, I think like kind of give me the endorphins of analysis and analytics, and just like in context too, right? You know, we get all grouchy because there's so many different weird grapes, but they're weird because they're specific, and they're weird because they were replaced at some point by other grapes that were easier to grow, made more money, became arbitrarily more famous. Telling that story and then putting it in the context of people doing great work is a lot of fun.
Yeah,
so
that is true. It's always the number one new sommelier complaint is there's just too many grapes in Italy, and they all got names that I can't pronounce, and you know, and I think you know consumers probably feel like that in some capacity too. But do you think, I don't want to say get around that because that's not fair, but it can be a very intimidating point, not only for you know consumers but for trade. So I mean, what's like advice that you have, or is it the joy of the, like you said, the intricacies, and that makes it easy for you? Or
I don't think it's easy. I would say one should give up on the illusion of expertise.
Ooh.
Which is to say that I think when it comes particularly to Italian wine, if the goal of studying and drinking Italian wine is to know them all, then like you drop the ball, because Italians don't, right? There's an inherent and deep regionality to Italian wine, which is what creates arbitrariness from the outside, because same grapes can be called different things in other parts of Italy. It's like, wait. You should focus on this thing and try to understand why they think it's relevant. And then once you've satisfied to your own, you know, capacity that you have a sense of it, then you can maybe move on. But you shouldn't think that just because you've studied it, you know it, and that your job is to continue to just voraciously consume abstract information. And I think ultimately wine is exciting because it's constantly humbling. You know, you cannot know everything about wine. It's particularly true of Italy, but the reason you can't know about wine, everything that there is to know about wine, is because every year there's a new vintage. Right. You're literally, there's constant knowledge production, information, and you know, you can't chatbot GPT wine experience. I mean, to step back for a second, what I try to tell people about Italian wine is your job is not to know everything, but if you put in like 10% effort, you're going to get 50% of value back. You're going to save a lot of money on a delicious bottle of white or red wine. And, you know, it doesn't have to be a parlor trick. You might get really excited and want to study it more, understand more of it, you know, get a stack of flashcards if you must. But really, it's about having the opportunity to engage with those wines in their in their own situation, in their own context. So,
what do you think this sort of 10% that people should know to get the maximum output? Like,
go to a wine shop. I mean,
Yeah.
just, go to a place that is actually devoted to the project of wine, and find a friend. Like, find your fellow nerd, or even not nerd. Find somebody who understands your tastes. Continue to go to them, ask questions, have a conversation, because ultimately, even if you pay $3, $4, $5 more per bottle, it's going to be a whole lot more fun. And, a lot of independent wine shops, if you buy 6 bottles or 12 bottles, you get a little bit of a discount.
Sure.
Like, if you keep going there, they will probably give you a discount generally. Yeah. Like, there's these things that,
that is true.
that they will want to see you too. And my first job was in a wine shop in Edgewater, independent spirits. And when I would taste a wine, I would think of customers. And we all would do that. And so having that kind of a human interaction, I think, is both gratifying and useful, right? So when I say put in a little bit more effort, I don't mean like, be able to rate the levels of tartaric acidity in grapes in Italy. I mean, like, don't just go to a big box store. Don't just buy your wine at a grocery store, even though there are good options and there are good, there are better and better, wine selections at those places. I just mean that if you stretch yourself out a little bit and find somebody who can get you to where you want to be, it's really quite gratifying. So,
I agree. The wine shop is, I think the easiest, and for most people. Some people are a little shy, don't want to look stupid. I understand. I've been there before too. I do think there's a lot of great online resources that people can just at least get their, toe in the water for. Slik School, Slik, shameless self-promotion here. But I think there's a lot of great people, not, Slik not included too, of people who are trying to educate or just make it more accessible. But then ultimately the goal should be, you need to find a place and you need to kind of continue your own journey in a way and form your opinions based on tasting and forming a relationship with a brick and mortar.
I think that's right. I mean, I think the biggest disservice that wine in America has done for itself is to make wine into a luxury good. The thing that was so striking to me when traveling in Europe is that wine is food, for lack of a better word. It sits at a table alongside food. And, if you're in Italy and you're drinking wine without food, they think you're a psychopath, right? They bring you food, right? And so that indicates to me that there's a certain democratic component to wine. And yet somehow we've defaced it and made it into something that, only a certain set of people should be drinking, or that kind of that lives above other people. I think wine occupies this very particular space in the beverage world. It's not beer, it's not seltzers, it's not spirits. I mean, I remember one day it just dawned on me the difference between beer and wine, because I, like most people, got into through drinking beer. I was like, oh God, if you want more beer, you can just make it. You can't just make more wine, right? You have what the vintage gives you, right? And so, at least in the area of wine that we're talking about, where it's like wine made by real people on farms that are farmed, ethically, and they, it's been hugely tumultuous for these producers too, where, one year they'll lose 80% of their crop, like that. Our producer in Chablis lost more than 80% due to multiple hail episodes and resulting mildew because of early bud break, because the climate is changing.
Right.
And so, like, when the plant starts shooting out its shoots early and then gets attacked by by hail, you stare out at your farm and you say, well, better luck next year. Whereas, like, if you just want more beer, you just buy a sack of grain.
I've never thought about it like that, but that is so true. It's more, for some reason, the word cyclical comes to mind. Like, it's like you can have multiple harvests throughout a year and
wine has a life.
Okay.
Wine has a life, and it's much more, I'm sure you talked about organic and biodynamic farming and like all the potential hippy dippiness of that kind of thing. But really, viticulture is much more tethered to the earth and its climate and its weather and its patterns than other alcoholic products. And so I don't mean that to elevate it, to make it more important than those things. I just mean it lives in a kind of like ecological and human system a little bit more meaningfully to me than some other drinks.
Sure. I think that's part of the charm for me too, is that it's just a pure result of what nature has to give it, and nature is slow. You know, I mean, we've done a pretty incredible thing.
It's slow until it's fast, and then No, you're right. No, it really is. It's a very different thing.
Yeah. And if we can allow one thing in our lives to kind of just be the way it's supposed to be, and if it takes time, that's okay. In a country where we are really bad at doing that, I appreciate that. But it makes it a hard business.
Yeah, you have to be, you know, we were talking about the differences between the sort of tiers of the industry, of the buying and selling. You know, one reason I knew I wanted to be an importer when I was thinking of starting my own company was that I wanted to have a close relationship with the people who made the products, because I find it to be a really impressive thing that they do. You know, some of them do it because it's a generational inheritance. They think it's important. Just because your parents did it doesn't mean you have to do it. And that's a thing you see a lot now, is that people are giving up their inheritances. But just fundamentally, the kind of philosophical viewpoint on the world that they have, I find really impressive. And so, you know, I think as an importer, I need to have a voice, but ultimately it's important to me that that the people who do the work see how we describe what they do, because there's too much wine out there, and so they can get lost in the shuffle. And so I view my job as an importer to be a representative for them. But, you know, I do that through communicating with my producers weekly, sometimes daily. And some of it is administrative, some of it is logistical, some of it is getting set up with the US government. Some of it is just checking in to see how things are going. You know, we have a wonderful Chianti Classico producer near Florence called Ciliano de Sopra. It's Madalena's birthday today. She turned 30. You know, she's very young.
Goodness. No kidding.
And so just things like that where it just reminds you that behind a bottle are people. And so that's the kind of pathos that I really like about being an importer. I get to think about those things as opposed to a more, I guess, instrumental way of working in the wine business. Yeah.
I think one of the first books I read when I got into wine was the Kermit Lynch book On the Wine Route. My mentor at the time gave it to me. And I think, this was 1970s. It was a different era for this sort of line of work. It was really romantic. It really was like, certainly hard, but when you write a book about these things years later too, you just
these are post facto recollections.
Absolutely. Did you've read that? I don't know. Does some of that ring true of these stories and like how he sees things? Like, is anything different from, 50 years ago?
I read those accounts and I want them to be, that's what I want the world to look like. Whether or not it does all the time is a different question.
Yeah.
But I think, to me, it's fairly easy to tell who has their values in the right place in this business. And, when you read something like that, you say, well, you understand why somebody's doing what they're doing.
Yeah, for sure.
I have no plans to write a book, but I will say that I think it's, it makes me happy to see that people think about it in a more or less romantic way.
Yeah.
While still being a sustainable business. When I started Lokai, I wanted two things for it. One was to be sustainable, and two was to be meaningful. And so by that I mean I wanted to be of service to the industry. I wanted to be there not just with 5 or 10 cases of wine a year to say, hey, this is cool, I have my own import company, but instead to say, hey, whether you're an independent retailer or whether you're a, Michelin-starred program, I'm here to have a professional conversation with you about these wines that mean something, but also to be able to tell both those restaurants and retailers and also the producers that I'm committed to them.
Yeah.
So I buy for a company that's only been selling wine for, a year. I buy a lot of wine, and I have multiple containers that will hopefully be here soon.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Is that also from the strike?
Yeah. So the delays pile on the delays. I mean, I think it's...
So like if the strike was 4 days effectively, how much backup? Is it a month behind?
We were told for every day of the strike, there would be a week delay to dock.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. And so, it's not exactly like in France where strikes get scheduled for a specific amount of time every few months. So you can plan around them a little bit. Here it's like, oh, this kind of strike hadn't happened since the 70s. And, I'll just say, and I am in complete agreement and support of the dock workers, because it is the case that the global multinationals that control the shipping system have made a lot of money over the last few years, and that money has not, surprise, surprise, trickled down to them. So all good. But yeah, it hurts a little bit because this is the busy time of year.
Of course.
And, you plan as best you can to purchase and to have availability so that you can bring in wine to Chicago. And, but sometimes you just can't. And so we're working through it, and hopefully we'll see all this wine before the end of the year. And if we do, then we'll make it. And I just want to say, I think this is not just a Lokai problem. This is a problem for tons of companies, medium and small. Storage in the US is expensive. And so, it's hard to keep an infinite amount of wine. I don't work with producers who have an infinite amount of wine, but it's hard to keep a ton of wine in inventory stateside. And so,
but why is that? Isn't it not just owning a warehouse and keeping inventory, or is there some...
that takes people, and it's really complicated to store and move, especially when it's small amounts of wine, right? Like, so, if there's a large warehouse on the East Coast in New Jersey, outside of New York City, sorry to get into the weeds, but,
oh no, we're getting into the weeds.
To store a case of wine there, like I buy like some magnums of wine from our producers in Burgundy or Bordeaux, and to store one bottle of that costs the same amount that it would cost me to store 10 cases of wine, because there are minimums, there are these, these systems are just, and I think logistics we discount how difficult logistics is, and I doubt anybody who does this work got into it to do logistics.
Sure.
And so I'm coming to understand it better, but the process of getting these wines, from Europe to New Jersey and from New Jersey to Illinois or into the other states that I work in isn't simple. And it's expensive. And so to do it is, you end up running into bottlenecks, and this is just a pretty unique one. So
totally. It makes me think about when Slik first started, we were trying to see what shipping would look like, even local shipping across. You need so much licensure. It wasn't even legal, but it's okay, what does it take to hire someone in Chicago, or at least do it ourselves to do some virtual events and just drive it around and figure it out. And I just got a small taste of what a logistics company does, and it's a nightmare.
I can barely return a package of something I bought and I don't want.
It's insane. And it's also such a shame that Amazon is so good at it. It's literally the best in the world at it. And that's why they're, so valuable. It's they took the hardest problem in a business and made it as cheap and as fast as possible. And now we've set the American standard for when we expect a package and what price to be delivered at. Which makes it so hard, not just for wine, but for any business, like you said. Yeah,
I feel much more patient now than I think I did maybe 5 years ago. And I try to infuse patience with people into this process, because there are inevitably issues, and that runs all the way from East Coast warehousing to warehousing in Illinois. You'll find out days after the fact that a delivery wasn't made how it should have been. And I think it's a hard business,
Yeah.
So I try to be patient with it, but it has been difficult. I think this last week of the strikes has trying to forecast how a busy season like October, November, December goes in a world where you lose about a month of your sales approximately, that's what we're being told, is it's concerning. And so, we've been talking about this for a while, but the only thing I can say is that I hope people take up the opportunity to talk to their favorite retailers, their favorite restaurants about the small, not just the small producers, but also the small distributors and importers that they like, and taste wines from those people. And there are lots of them in Chicago and throughout the United States. So this isn't just about Lokai, but it is, it's important. I think sometimes people look at us as like middle people, as just the people who take a margin on something that maybe somebody could buy, ship in a box from Europe for cheaper.
Sure.
And I think that they've been given a bad name at times, for sure. But I was thinking about this recently, is that there's a reason why one of the last things that isn't being sold on Amazon is wine. If I had to bet, if you essentially tabula rasa, leveled out the system of wine sales in the United States, and kind of like said, this is kind of incoherent, it's a patchwork, it's arbitrary, it's kind of random and hard, and just said, nope, anybody can do anything with wine, they can sell it and buy it wherever. My guess is something like 75 or 80% of wine that is made in America would just be called Amazon Red Blend or Amazon White Blend and would be delivered in a box to your house. And it's our job as consumers to evaluate whether or not we think that's a good thing. But I do think that there are details and specificities and unique stories and histories that would be lost if good distributors and importers didn't exist, because that's our job. It's to say, there's no reason in the world why anyone needs Timorasso or Verdicchio or Burgundy, but we think it's important, and we think this might make your life a little bit better when you're sitting down at the table or at a restaurant with someone you love to drink. And so, I hope that we provide value in that sense, but ultimately it's up to the consumer to decide on that.
I'm reeling because the way that you said that, I had never thought about it quite like that. I love your Amazon Red Blend. It's like, yes, it would be, because that's what we've done with everything. We've made a Roundy's and a Costco and a Kroger version of, every grocery staple. Why wouldn't someone just do the same with wine? And what do we lose when we do that? And I don't even think it's so much part of our culture it's not even just culture, it's just economics, it's just people's financial situation of like, I need to pick the cheapest thing.
Yep.
You call wine a grocery item. My mentor calls it that too. It's food, like in some countries. Here it's not, but I just think about all of the places I visited, and you probably think of it too, or anyone else who's visited a wine region and heard a story based on something that might not exist if Amazon just homogenized the whole thing. Yeah. We would just wipe out regions like, Walla Walla or Willamette and just be like, well, this is all the Amazon block. These are 95% is this, and we'll just lose all these and great stories.
I don't think that there's a necessary conflict between value and specificity. I just think that there's a certain steamrolling that can happen. I think, the history of the development of the American wine sales system, the prohibition, 3-tier system, all that, it is arbitrary and it's perverse at times, but I think the best argument that could be made for it, which wasn't its intention, but the best argument that can be made for it is curation. And so good distributors and good importers use their resources and their energies in showing people things that, it's not about persuading someone to buy something. It's about showing someone something they didn't even know existed that they will love, right? When we taste wines, we think of people, whether we're independent retail, box stackers, or whether we're importers. Our job is to be like, hey, we represent a bunch of really unique, really novel, really interesting producers.
Yeah.
But no one's like, I really would like some Durella from the Veneto.
Yeah, sure.
But if I taste a wine, I say, okay, this person makes 5,000 bottles a year of Durella.
Yeah.
And they can offer me 28 cases, half of the pallet of it. Essentially, my business math is like, do I know 28 people who would buy a case of this? And I say, yeah,
Nice.
probably.
Yeah.
And so that, it's that kind of thing where it's more important to me that I find it compelling and moving, and I think of people when I taste it, than it is like, oh, how's the margin work out? Is this going to be hard to like get over here? What is it better than that other wine I had? It's more just like, I know I've met these people, I taste these wines, they mean something to me, and like it's the onus is on me to communicate that and to make it relevant. So.
And it's obvious that you said explicitly, these are the first things you think about when you make a purchase for your business. But, also part of sustainability and being responsible is this financial responsibility, right? So, I mean, how do you strike the balance of like the numbers, like the actual business of it? And he's like, is this sustainable? We're losing a month this year. Like, we all worry about money problems all the time, whether we own a business or not. Sure. But how do you find, I guess, either the balance of a mindset or a way that you do business in which that it ends up being okay, or you turn a decent or an average profit margin every year, every quarter?
I said when I started Lokai, I wanted it to be meaningful and sustainable. And my operative definition of sustainable is you have to be able to pay your bills.
Yes, definitely.
And so we pay our bills, and I won't risk that for anything. I think it's just bad manners not to pay your bills. And so, but that means it costs a lot of money. I mean, one thing about global shipping is that you ship in 40-foot containers. And so that's about 1,200 to 1,300 cases of wine.
Sorry, say that again. One shipping container is 1,200 to 1,300 cases of wine.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Right. And so the most efficient way of shipping is to ship in 40-foot containers. And so, to put those containers together takes both a lot of dollars and a lot of like interfacing. So I can fill a container with like 10 producers.
Right.
So that's 10 little people all across Italy. Like, there's
in one 40-foot container.
In one little container. And, but it's way more efficient to do that than it is to do what they call LCL, or less than container load orders. And it's actually faster. So, but you have to, well, it's faster because you essentially you understand your producer schedule, and they have that container like ready to go. Whereas if you just say, hey, I have 56 cases of wine that I need to be picked up, it just gets put into this whole morass where they plug it in when they feel like it. Okay,
I see. You get a bit more priority because you feel
because you've kind of done the front work to be like, this is a full container.
I see.
But ultimately, it's most efficient dollars-wise. But to do that, you have to be able to pay for 1,200, 1,300 cases of wine. Interesting. Yeah.
Did someone teach you this, or is this?
I mean, this is stuff you asked about Rosenthal and having worked in the import business for a while. None of it was explicit. But I was able to, it's not rocket science. It's just complicated. Right. So it takes some time and energy to understand, but it's not, it's not a quantum physics or whatever. Yeah, sure.
Quantum surgery, whatever the joke is.
But yeah, it's kind of a puzzle, actually. I like to solve problems. And so that's one nice side of it, is like when it goes well, it goes well. You just have to be a little bit zen about it when it doesn't. So.
Yeah. Sure. And I think you are both of those things. So
trying.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Do you want to play a game?
Oh boy. Sure.
Great. Finish that. Have you heard of Have you heard of blind tasting before?
I have heard of blind tasting. I'm very bad at it.
Yeah.
Which is great.
This is great.
Yeah. It's a skill that I think other people have really developed well. My palate is my own, I like. But
for sure.
Yeah. And it's always exciting to see what people have open. So
Yeah. Well, if this is, do you want any hints or do you just want to go for it?
I'll take a hint. No blind tasting is truly blind, I always say.
That might be true.
Yeah. Somebody's giving it to you, and unless it's like, even if it's the court, they have a set of parameters, right?
That's true.
You're not going to be like, oh, that's a long age Vernaccia. You know, it's like,
yeah. This would be a testable blind tasting through the certified Court of Master Sommeliers exam.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to give you. I thought about giving you another.
That's pretty good.
But I think that narrows it down to. Okay. And I'm going to give you the 60 seconds because I think it's more fun this way. I unfortunately already know what it is. I should really do one where Corinne sets it up where we're both going to do a double blind, but next time you come, we'll do that. All right, so you're gonna have 60 seconds. What I would like for you can kind of start telling. It doesn't really matter, but you have to guess the grape in the region.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, go for it.
Jammy. Sometimes I get some Southern French vibes. The alcohol's a little high for me.
Okay. Are you going old world, new world? What's your gut say? You have 30 seconds.
Oh boy. Okay. I think this is new world.
Okay.
This feels like it could be sort of like a Grenache Syrah situation from the West Coast, or just like a pretty warm vintage Southern French guy.
Okay. All right. Give me a guess. Region and grape.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Yeah, 4 seconds.
Not a lot of oak. This is... It's like a Chilean...
Ow.
Chilean red grape.
I was
Cabernet-ish.
Yeah, name us to go.
Yeah,
you're going to go Cabernet from Chile?
Yeah, sure.
I love that. I think that's great. That was good. You did great. Are you ready?
Sure.
Drum roll, please. So this is the private label. Yeah. This is, well, for people who don't know, this is Paso Robles Cabernet Sauvignon.
There you go.
So I'd give you a lot of points for that.
There you go.
You know, almost all of them, even because you said West Coast too, dude. I mean, I think that's pretty good for 60 seconds.
Yeah, and I can't remember the last bottle of domestic wine I had.
Yeah. No, you did great. That was good.
Thank you.
So I don't know if you've had this, but this is the Bottles Up private label.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so Melissa Zeman, we love her.
Chateau blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so this is pretty funny.
Yeah.
If you're listening either on Spotify or on YouTube, I would say look at the video of it now. But this is a private label. So generally when wineries make wine, it goes to a lot of different cuvées and bottlings. And if you have a good relationship with, it can be anyone, whether it's a wine club or a retail shop, someone who sells wine to people, you can ask for a barrel or a tank of wine and call it a private bottle or a private label, being like, Melissa Zeman of Bottles Up said, I want a tank of wine just for me, and we're going to call it Chateau blah, blah, blah,
nice.
which is an excellent name.
Yeah.
And the back label does say, blah, 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 this wine is good, blah, 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 you should drink it, blah, 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 and be happy. And that's all it is.
I mean, I think that's good manners for wine sales.
Yeah.
You know, is that our job is that hopefully people are happy, and Melissa does that better than just about anybody. So
I love her.
Shout out to Melissa.
Well, and you were talking about, wine shops earlier too. Yeah. And I just think that she's probably, I mean, I like them all. And it depends on what you're looking for, what neighborhood you live in, and how far you want to drive. But Melissa's is probably my favorite. I make an extra concerted effort to drive out there.
Yeah. Great people doing great work.
Yeah. What's your favorite right now, you think?
For wine shops?
Yeah.
I think Altogether Now does great. I like a tight set of wines.
Definitely.
And also just like the energy of having, 50, 60 selections.
Yeah.
Where, they've built up the credibility where people come in, ask a few questions, and trust what they get. I also actually really like how they have little cards for each of their employees.
It is
says,
cute.
Oh, Molly likes this, or Aaron likes this, or Adam likes this. And I just think again, it's this like pathos of wine where it's not too precious, but they care. Right? You don't have to, wear an ascot and have a testament to care about wine.
Sure.
You actually should care more about people and what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So
you brought up a good point with the bottle tags too. Usually you'll see wine descriptors or something like that in there, but at I always do this easy still, and I shouldn't, but it's Easy does it altogether now. I'm always like,
well, they've done it themselves.
Yeah.
So.
I'm not alone in this, and I know that. But yeah, they do it based on what the employee likes. And I think that's a way to encourage people to be like, I think I like this person's taste, and not necessarily this tastes like white flowers, like you were saying too. It's a different way of thinking about wine. Because I think consumers have a really hard time describing what they like in a wine.
Sure.
We see it all the time, and sometimes we have to ask silly questions to get to the point of saying, okay, I think I have the idea now. Yeah,
and people should trust their palates. I mean, I find like my heart breaks when I'm pouring wine for customers and they taste and they say, what are the tasting notes? Because they say, well, you're tasting it. And it's important that you trust what you're tasting, right? And so I take that question in the spirit in which it's intended, which is to say, what is the general nexus of place and grape and vintage that I'm tasting here in this glass?
Right.
But at the same time, it always makes me feel like people don't trust what they're doing when they taste, and I hope people do that more. I know you do a lot of work to get people to a place where they're comfortable with their experiences as wine drinkers, as opposed to fretting about whether they're doing it right or not.
Certainly.
So,
well, you've worked a lot of different fields in wine. What kind of advice do you give people? Like when people went into independent spirits and they said, like you said, the intention of the spirit of the question, and they might ask you, what do you like? But like, they're really just looking for some guidance. Like, what do you advise people getting into it?
My first question is always, what are you eating? Like, I think I got into wine through food, through cooking.
Right.
I've never worked in kitchens or anything like that, but I cook a lot. And the dynamic between those things is, I think, really important. And so if they have a food plan, then you can very easily slot into, region and style and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think, and trying to gauge people's interest in the new and the novel. There are some people, if you've worked in a wine shop, there's some people who want the same thing every time, and that's fine. I think that's changing a lot, but at the same time, the job is not to like browbeat anyone to changing what they like. It's to offer them glimmers of possibility in what they're tasting. Yeah. So
for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's nice and true. I generally also ask questions like, do you do something more classic or more adventurous? And generally also price point too when it comes to like retail or restaurant setting. It's like
I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, also like the general profile of our wines is that they're generally better day 2 and 3. And so like, a little bit more austerity, a little bit more acidity, like old school, old world. Sometimes people like that, sometimes people don't. But some sort of general questions, some gentle nudges about that kind of thing. But
that's interesting. I don't think people like the wines taste better day 2 or day 3. I think people always feel like they need to drink it the day of.
Yeah, I mean, I think wines live on acidity and they live on tannin. And so, wines with one or both of those things made in a reasonably hands-off fashion tend to express themselves with air better. Now, it's not to say that every bottle's better if you decant it forever and ever, but and I don't like to talk much about decanting because it gives it this whole thing. But I do think like if you have a quarter of a bottle left open, and just certainly don't pour it down the drain, and also don't feel the compunction to have to finish it, put it in the fridge, put a cork on it. You don't need anything else, but you'll be surprised at what you taste. I mean, I've got some bottles in there, like these are not the bottles that I was doing this with, but I had them open for a week, and the wines are like compelling.
Right.
Their differences are what are interesting to me. And again, it's like research.
Totally.
But it's pretty fun.
I got asked for some advice for an article that was like, aging wines and when you should drink wines and what wines you should drink on what day. And I understood the intention they were like, people just want something really concrete. People want drink red wine in 5 days or whatever.
Are you sad?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I gave a little bit of that because I think just it was for good housekeeping. And I'm just like, I think this viewership just wants to be told what to do a little bit.
Yeah,
like,
that's
I think of all these tired moms who are like, just tell me. And it's like, yeah, okay, I got you. I got you, girl. But also half the fun is like, try it when you think it's dead, when you think it's been too long.
Yeah.
Like it's actually, especially for white wines, I think kind of do better than the red wines for the most part.
I know, I actually agree with you on that. I think that's right. And I think white wine has the capacity to surprise in that way. I think a little bit more in general than red wines do, because red wine, you know, like there's so much extraction of color and fruit from the skins, and like white wine has this kind of like verticality to it that, depending on the grape and how the wine is made, like kind of like fans out over time, but doesn't lose its focus. And so I find that stuff super interesting.
For sure. Well, cool. Is there anything you'd like to gas up, talk about, bump?
I mean, I will just say, like, I think I'm constantly impressed by the quality of people in the Chicago wine and, you know, restaurant and retail markets, but also the region more generally. I started Lokai not just as a Chicago importer, but also a regional importer. And I think, you know, it's often the case that with producers, when you talk to them, you know, they think of America as New York and California.
Of course, yeah.
And there are companies in America that sell wine that think of America as New York and California. And I think Chicago and the people in the region have some of the most incredible skills, not just as wine professionals per se, which is to say how to be, you know, good restaurant service, et cetera, how to know things about wine, but also there's such a humanity to the way that they do what they do, because, you know, I think they've maybe not been passed over too much, but like there isn't enough focus on the good work that's being done there. And so starting Lokai, what I wanted to do was to be a member of that community, was to contribute and to be, you know, in connection with the people who do such incredible work. And so, you know, it's a more cosmic shout out, but it really is like, I think if you come to Chicago, or if you go to Milwaukee, you go to Minneapolis, Detroit, you know, I think you'll find people, all of whom are doing top-notch work and are ready to have a conversation with you that's both helpful when it comes to wine and food, but also meaningful. And so don't hesitate to ask questions of people. Don't hesitate to express your passion and excitement. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, you don't know what, you know, the grapes of, you know, chocolate are. It's like, no, it's more about how to actually have a human connection. So there aren't enough of those avenues and opportunities in the world anymore. And so getting to do that is what drives me. And I think going to restaurants and dealing with good retailers is like, I think we all feel that in some way, shape, or form. So like lean into it. And there are great people in Chicago and the Midwest who can help. So
very cool. Well, Randall Bush of Lokai, based out of Chicago, but importing all throughout the U.S. right now?
No, we're currently in
Midwest?
4 states.
Okay.
But we have plans for a few more before next year or so is my hope. But I'm but one person currently. So.
Yes, that's fair. That's fair. What are the states?
Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan.
Midwest represent. I
right.
love it. Very cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.